Good afternoon. You're watching AB Live, a news-based chat show in which we discuss topics ranging from business, news, politics, and so much more. On today's episode, we are discussing the concept and idea of circular economy. And in the studios right now, I have Dr. Floris Schulze, and we also have Pragya Sharma. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Great. So, Dr. Floris, I'm going to start with you. Tell us more about CESI and what it does in the region.
CESI is a world-leading consultant to the power sector and environmental sector, covering the entire value chain from generation, transmission, distribution up to the end user. And we are providing advisory services to utilities and regulatory bodies and governments. We are involved, I might say heavily involved, in renewable projects in this region and also related to smart grids and smart metering. Maybe we can talk about this kind of references later on. A number of projects are also related to the sustainability aspects. So we are also an independent notified body for testing and certification of high power, high voltage, medium voltage and low voltage components, electromechanical components. In our state-of-the-art laboratories, we own and have established and own and operate state-of-the-art laboratories worldwide, Europe, and recently also starting the activities in the GCC, having a joint venture together with GCC Electrical Testing Laboratory to set up a state-of-the-art laboratory in this region.
All right, basically all things energy then.
Exactly.
All right, great. Coming to you, Pragya. So Unilever, a global giant, of course. You have brands, you have products, services, etc. But how exactly does the sustainability, environment, climate change conversation fit into what you are doing?
I think sustainability is now becoming a part of our DNA. I think the existence of an organization like Unilever is not possible without sustainability, right? And it's because of the environmental changes that are happening around us. For businesses and corporates like Unilever to thrive and remain relevant, I think having sustainability as part of the DNA and our culture is so important. Yeah. Right. In 2010, in fact, for this reason, we had launched our Unilever Sustainability Living Plan, to see how we can do our bit in this, volatile environment, with all the issues of climate change, plastic wastes, water shortages. And see how we stay relevant to consumers, win their trust. Our brands are those which matter to them, which are not just delivering more shiny hair or cleaner clothes or healthier food, but they stand for a lot more that consumers can really relate to and become a part of their lives.
There's also a mentality change happening where consumers are more and more moving towards brands that are socially responsible. So just coming to the whole conversation we are having today about circular economy, for those of you who don't know, I would like Dr. Floris to just explain the concept briefly.
The concept of circular economy. Maybe I'm not the right expert for this, but generally everybody is involved in the circular economy at the moment, which is basically reuse of and recycling of materials and to be more or less environmental friendly and CO2 neutral is one of the buzzwords. I call it buzzwords sometimes because sometimes it's used for all kinds of purposes. Yeah. But I just want to touch base about circular economy because I think it's not new. Basically, this concept already existing decades ago. At that time, it was maybe called life cycle assessment. And it was basically used for financial purposes, for cost reductions, maintenance strategy. Now I'm talking again about the power sector, of course. Maintenance strategies, replacement strategies. This is basically already part as a kind of circular economy. Then suddenly another item entered into the game, which is sustainability. That means suddenly the life cycle assessment changed into a product sustainability assessment. But also this case is product related. Right. And now the most interesting part, which I find is a really a good development worldwide, is you find suddenly that the system is coming into place. So it's not only product related, but it's system related.
How do you mean system here?
That means, in this case, I'm talking about PSSA assessments. Okay. That means product system sustainability assessments. That means it's not only the product itself, the material or whatsoever being reused or whatsoever, but it's also the environment related to the product during manufacturing, during transportation, during installation, during operation. So it's the entire system which is now taken into account.
Right. So you just said that circular economy as a concept isn't quite new. It was always there. But there are new elements added to it.
Correct.
Is that what you're getting at?
Correct.
Coming to you now then, Pragya. So what are the new elements that you've added to make sure you fit into the circular economy? And by you, I mean Unilever.
Yes. So let me just step back and say that, we simply define our purpose and agenda as making sustainable living commonplace. Yeah. And to that end, there are three parts to it. One, we have to walk the talk. Our brands, our products have to be sustainable, whether it's sourcing from sustainable and ethical sources on ingredients, whether it's making our packaging and plastics recyclable and recycled in many ways. The second aspect is also awareness and education. And that is where we need to rely heavily upon the work of all the local authorities and the government also in spreading this awareness so that what we are saying is also resonating with the consumers who we are speaking with. And the third part of this agenda is also to create an ecosystem that enables us to deliver this. So, for example, without a proper collection mechanism, it is foolhardy to believe that our waste reduction agenda or plastics reduction agenda will deliver any results,
right,
or will have any meaning for the consumer. Yeah. So if we put all of this together, we are doing three things. One, we've just recently had the launch of our brand called Love, Beauty and Planet, which is one of our first fully sustainable brand in our portfolio. That's one. Second, thanks to the government, the local government of UAE and their efforts in spreading awareness and education about sustainable consumption. Yeah, and to that effect, we are also working on a lot of partnerships and coalition to sort of participate in the circular economy agenda and to work on systems like waste collection, waste disposal, in ways in which whatever we do and the products that we put on our shelf ultimately come back and live their purpose.
Right.
Right.
So let me just ask you about the business case that we see here. Of course, all of that comes with a cost, which I'll get to in a little bit. But before that, the business case of circular economy, recently, I think at the World Economic Forum, it was said that the GCC states could save up to $138 billion by moving towards circular economy. How exactly would you achieve that?
I think it's a combination of different factors. I just want to one step back, because I want to give you an example about the circular economy and how the definition, according to my view, this is being put in place currently with this PSSA assessment. Just moving back 10 years when I was living in the Netherlands, before I relocated to Dubai. I'm talking again about the energy sector in this case. I was asked by the utilities for a kind of promotion related to renewables,
right.
Rooftop solar and wind energy at a very low cost. So that means high attractive. So what happens is that many people moved into this direction. Everybody went for this bargain, I might say, for this opportunity. But then what happened is the following. There was no cap. That means suddenly there was an over demand related to this, to buy electricity from rooftop solar and wind. That means many people moved in this direction, signed contracts. So the expectations exceeded what they had in mind, and it exceeded expectations basically. So what happens now? They had the Dutch authorities and the Dutch operators needed to move to Germany to import rooftop solar, renewable energy, to Holland in order to accommodate and to meet this increase in demand of people applying for this wind and solar.
Right.
But in order to have a stable system, that means in Germany, inefficient brown coal fired power plants were put in place in order to balance the system.
Okay.
So from my personal perspective, I think it was a good idea. If I apply the life cycle assessment and the PSA assessment, I think the outcome is positive. But if I apply the system approach, because I went for rooftop solar and wind, on the other side, inefficient power plants need to be ramped up in order to accommodate the balancing. So overall, it might have been different related to the business case.
Right.
To give you an example in the electricity sector, because there is a huge positive way related to this system approach, which I strongly believe in. In the distribution sector, I think 67% of greenhouse gas emissions are related to material management. Applying, and we have some examples of retrofitting of equipment within the distribution grid resulted, for example, retrofit of switchgear resulted in a positive outcome. That means a reduction of 27% more or less in the usage of natural resources, a reduction of 75% of gas emissions, a reduction of downtime, because basically you're replacing only a component within an installation instead of the complete installation, which was common practice in the past. And it provides an additional productivity of the people. So the overall balance is a positive balance related to this example of a business case, which happened actually in Europe. But again, this depends on the location, the situation, in order to calculate and estimate the benefits.
But that's the thing, right? So you're talking about Europe, which has a completely different demographic, of course, and then coming to the GCC, one major problem that I see moving towards sustainability is we've traditionally had a different set of lifestyle choices and standard of living, which has been high, and we've been of a consumption mentality than a savings mentality when it comes to everything.
Yeah.
So do you actually see that happening here? And I think you might be able to take this question better because you deal with consumers directly.
Yes. Actually, first of all, I think there is a business case, there is a solid business case, right? Before I comment on the GCC business case, let me tell you something that we internally have seen. Proof of the pudding is that in Unilever in 2018, our sustainable brands grew about 70% faster than the organization, right?
Oh, wow.
Which was up by about 50% versus 2017. And now we are getting about 3/4 of our growth from these sustainable brands.
Oh, that's
brands,
very impressive.
Yeah. Brands which talk purpose, brands which have a meaning for consumers. Yeah.
Right. Can I just ask you then, are these brands more expensive than the brands that you were traditionally selling? Because there is this whole idea of organic products, green products being more expensive.
No, these are brands I'm sure. You know Lifebuoy, Lipton, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Omo powder, and Dove, of course. So these are our big brands and commonplace, common household names. And we cannot show that kind of performance if the consumers are not aware and rewarding us for what we are telling them. Yeah.
Right.
So I think one spoke in the wheel of awareness among consumers and how we sort of, co-create this agenda for ourselves and change the lifestyles of consumers is very important. Yeah. One. Second, and these are simple things. And when I say simple things, it's about you can put a recycled or a recyclable packaging on shelf, right? But it serves no purpose if the consumer is still buying them in plastic bags, overusing, carrying them back in, those heavy plastic utility bags. So the simple things that we do is just offer them cloth bags, which are made from organic jute. Or recycled cloth and paper. Yeah. So we are really walking the talk, and tying the two ends.
Are you doing it for free though?
They are run as promotions in multiple cases, and some are run in partnership.
Right.
So, for example, recently with the launch of our bamboo toothbrushes, we partnered with Kafur and gave these bags to consumers out of the cash tills, and that was the option for the consumer to carry their products back in these bags. Yeah. So some of these simple things, because it's a lot about habit change, right? And habit change starts early. Let me tell you a personal anecdote. It's my 6-year-old came back one day from school and she told me, "Mommy, do you know the 3 R's?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she told me, "Reduce, reuse, and recycle." I fell off my chair. I heard these 3 words maybe 5 or 6 years ago in my boardroom.
Right.
So the point I'm trying to make is it is also to applaud the effort of the local authorities and the government to embed some of this education in school curriculums at a very, very early age. Right? Because if children are exposed to this, they can also bring about a lot of choice and habit change in households.
Right.
A lot of us are already conditioned in our minds and it's, difficult to change habit, but it is changing, right? The last point I want to make is that to close the loop on the circular economy, it's important we have the whole, collection mechanism in place, which we don't. So, for example, do we have enough collection mechanism to segregate waste of, which is biodegradable, non-biodegradable, plastics, etc., etc. And a lot of topics are being discussed these days which is about saving our deserts, saving the camels, so on and so forth. So the awareness is getting generated.
Yeah.
And I think coming back to the point of the business case that you raised, of course, the business case is there, and I think efforts are being made to deliver it and bring it to life.
You mentioned collection there. That was another point I wanted to discuss with you, which is recovery in the whole circular economy aspect of it. So basically, what's recycled is then again used by manufacturers, the bigger industries, etc. But is that a challenge here right now, especially in the energy sector?
Yes, it's still a challenge, I think. However, we are moving into this direction, especially related to retrofitting, reuse of components, also within the electric vehicles, for example, the battery storage within. There's lots of projects, research ongoing with a positive outcome in order to reuse of batteries. The only problem with electric vehicles is that it's not clear what will be the lifespan of these kind of vehicles. That's a bit of different because it's part of the equation in order to understand if it's a positive effect or not. So
also, when is it going to go mainstream though? I mean, we're talking about electric hybrid vehicles, but they are a niche right now, and it's not what we see on the roads as much as you'd see in Europe, for example.
Correct.
So isn't that again a challenge for the GCC?
Correct. It's one of the challenges. And this also relates to, of course, the electricity subsidies. That's just one of the things that really needs to be reconsidered. However, Dubai is doing a great job in the GCC, to be honest. Dubai is front-ending basically all these kind of developments related to renewables, related to rooftop solar. We have been the consultant of Shams Dubai with DIWA, supporting DIWA. We are the first one in the region for rooftop solar. So Dubai is really front-ending this kind of activities, including the electrical vehicles. If you look at the push from the government for supporting electrical vehicles, charging stations. So I foresee that within Dubai there will be more and more incentives probably in order to move into this electrical vehicle card. Okay, for the rest of the remaining part of the MENA region, the GC, it might be different, but at the end they will be moving slowly into this direction.
But that's the thing, the rest of the GCC, again, we're heavily dependent on oil. Not as much Dubai, but then the rest of it is still, we're talking about diversification, but then majority still comes from oil. So now there's oil, but there's also the sun. So where exactly do you draw the line or the balance between solar, renewables, and what's the biggest revenue generator?
I think it's very important to establish a pan-Arabic energy market.
Okay.
Because I think this is key. And luckily, we are involved as CESI in supporting the GCIA and the Arab Fund of Economic and Social Development for establish a pan-Arabic interconnection grid. Technically, is already feasible. So in order to allow energy exchange among the member states and between regions, even connecting the GCC grid to Africa, Europe and Asia Pacific. It's not a utopia, it's reality. Technically, it's possible. Simple.
Right.
And this will be allowing energy trading. And then I think the GCC is in a very attractive position, let's put it like this, because they are strategically well located. Africa on the left, Europe on the north, Asia on the right. They have basically a majority of reserves on oil and gas, and they have abundance of sun.
Right.
So they basically have all the ingredients in place, and they have plenty of space. It's very important in order to develop renewable energy, solar. You need to have sufficient space in order to be able to build these kind of power plants.
Right.
Which is Saudi Arabia is doing currently. And this will be allowing, all these ingredients will be allowing the GCC to be a kind of powerhouse or a kind of energy marketplace for Europe, Africa and Asia. Just some figures, because, for example, Iraq. Iraq is one of the players. They are desperately in need for energy.
Yeah.
I think they have 30 gigawatts. This is figures based on the IRENA and the International Energy Agency, including the Middle East Electricity, which is a leading event in the Middle East.
Okay.
Iraq has 30 gigawatts of installed capacity, but only 18 gigawatt is operational. Then they have 40% of transmission and distribution losses.
Okay.
So they are desperately in need for support. Okay, you can start building all kinds of power plants locally, which they are doing on the renewables, or get connected to the GCC grid.
So then you're talking about energy trading between countries.
Exactly. Right. And it's not only energy trading, it's also energy security, But this is one of the things that is happening at the moment. Just to give you, because we have been involved in this Pan-Arabic interconnection, recently the first Pan-Arabic Energy Trade Conference will be held in Cairo in 6th and 7th of November of this year. It will be the first one. So they will be discussing the possibility of energy trading among the Arab countries. So it's moving.
But there are obviously a lot of aspects of that. You're talking about the geopolitical situations. You're talking about the business, the cost. Sorry.
Can I just add to this?
Sure.
It's so true because we've achieved a significant milestone in our goal towards, as Unilever, to become carbon neutral by 2030.
Okay.
Yes, and all of our offices, in fact, here and our manufacturing facilities are now using 100% renewable electricity.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, so here's a live example of how it comes together eventually.
Yeah. Great. So infrastructure is also happening. So I was just going to get to that. So you spoke about your services, of course, how you're changing the whole mentality, mindset, just by doing the little things of avoiding plastic bags, etc. Another aspect that I want to cover is products specifically. You spoke about the one cosmetic range that you've launched. But on a more broader scale, when you're talking about the brands that you mentioned, there's Lipton, Lifebuoy, etc. They're not known to be brands that caters to that sort of audience. These are mass brands, of course. So is there a way that all of these consumer brands, the mainstream consumer brands, can also have an element of sustainability and just keeping in mind global warming, climate change, etc. in it, just to cater to the masses at the same rates?
Absolutely. I think... let me tell you, our CEO Alan Jope has put a stake in the ground and said that we are going to dispose of any brands that don't have any meaningful purpose besides just making your hair more shiny or skin more soft, etc., etc. So to that effect, every brand that we have is sustainable, has elements of this agenda. I think what we have started doing recently, I think over the course of last 5 to 7 years, is talking about it openly. Right? So because that also gets appreciated by the consumers, all that. So for example, we in our tea blends in Lipton, we source our tea blends from 100% Rainforest Alliance certified tea estates. Right? Our palm oil in a lot of our soaps and detergents is sustainably sourced. Right? Lifebuoy has a big agenda of promoting hygiene, among children, and among underserved groups. And then, so on, Dove has a whole global program on promoting self-esteem among women. Right.
So it's not just environment sustainability, it's social sustainability
it's social sustainability as well. And environment is, you're going to see some action now soon where it will go out in a big way. 75% of our packaging, plastic packaging now is recycle ready. Right. So we are very conscious of every pack that we are now going to be putting on shelf is either recycled or recyclable. Right. And it will come with its share of scars and, a bit of non-beauty like elements, but that's what it is. That's reality.
Right. And what are the tangible impacts that you've seen? You'll obviously know how much emissions, which you will probably have the emission count, etc., that you've saved and the energy you've saved in the whole process. But what are the tangible stats that you have after adopting this approach?
So I think one of the things that we're going to do, and let me be specific to the market, is Love Beauty and Planet, the range which has got recently launched. It hinges on 4 important pillars. It's ethically and sustainably sourced ingredients, right? It's technology or fast rinse technology to save water. It's PETA certified vegan products, and it's 100% recycled and recyclable packaging. Right. So all these hinges on the portfolio is to deliver basically one objective, which is obviously responsible beauty, beauty that something that does good for your beauty and also does good for the planet. And this is measured through our carbon footprint. So we will be very transparently releasing, how we are sort of reducing our carbon footprint. And our goal on this particular range is to reduce it by 20% by 2020. So you will see a lot of the stats being released to this end.
Speaking of carbon footprint though, the UAE ranked 7th when it came to carbon dioxide emissions. So that looks like so I think we have a carbon abatement strategy for 2050 and then we have carbon emission strategies for 2020, etc. So in terms of the energy sector and covering different forms of energy, both renewables and non-renewables, do you think there is something that can be done, or there needs to be a change that needs to be introduced in order to achieve it?
Well, I think they are already moving into this direction, if I have to say. If I look at the figures related to the UAE, but also in GCC in general, if you look at the investments, the amount to be invested in the power sector in the GCC, which is around 131 billion of US dollars for the coming 5 years.
Okay.
Divided into two parts, around 81 billion US dollars for generation and 50 billion US dollars for transmission and distribution.
Right.
Saudi Arabia is topping this investment, followed by the UAE. We are around 25 billion to be invested into generation for the coming few years, and around 13 or 14 billion US dollars into transmission distribution. If you look at the investments and the focus, and it's renewables. That means if you look at the targets in the GCC related to renewables, it's enormous. They are really challenging targets, and they are moving into this direction. If I look at the Dubai energy strategy, 15% in 2030, 15% of the energy generated should be coming from renewables.
Okay.
Followed by Abu Dhabi, 7% in 2023. Saudi Arabia is announcing 9.5 gigawatts of renewables for the coming years. That means lots of this money is being put into the renewable sector.
Right.
And in order to be more or less compensating the CO2 emissions. So I think they are already moving into this direction fast. Okay, the next step, the next challenge will be, and this is of course a little bit of our involvement in these countries, is to make sure that those renewables, to avoid that we fall into the same pitfalls what happened in Europe. That means we have to learn from the lessons learned in Europe.
Right.
And that we have to avoid, you cannot just put everything, renewables, the complete grid, the entire grid, depending on volatile renewables. I'm referring to photovoltaic and solar and wind.
Right.
Because you will be facing instabilities into the system. That means you have to build additional power plants, conventional power plants, in order to stabilize the grid. So once the sun sets, suddenly you have 70% of penetration of renewables into your grid. You find yourself in a critical situation because it needs to be compensated by conventional renewables.
Also, to build a separate plant will come with a huge cost, won't it?
Yes, but that means it's a stepwise approach. And I think the GCC has learned from the lessons that we did wrong in Europe. Because we had a number of blackouts, instabilities in Europe, which resulted in a cascading event in Italy, in Germany, because it was a learning lesson. We started, and I think the GCC is moving towards the right direction. Step by step, we are supporting also the utilities and governments to make sure that based on the existing infrastructure, to estimate the amount of penetration of renewables that can be connected to the grid safely. To avoid any problems. And it depends on the location of your developments. One of the things that came out of the World Energy Congress was, for example, make sure that you put those renewable plants where you get maximum of wind and solar factors, but at the shortest connection cost. That means close to the connections and to the load centers.
Right. Also, there is this whole question about if we are using all the resources, the natural resources we have efficiently and optimally to get to that, because, well, this is the region which receives a lot of sun's energy and we also have a lot of wind energy, but is it being optimally utilized? That is perhaps for another day, another conversation.
But it's part of sustainability overall.
Of course.
Rooftop solar programs which are embarking in Oman, Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, which is all moving towards the right direction.
Right.
Green economy, because it also results in additional economy related to components and this kind of things. There's one other thing that is challenging will be to make sure that those components are quality assured. That means the sector will be shifting towards a different type of energy, electricity. So you have to make sure that you will not be flooded by components from all over the world at cheap cost, but with a low reliability. You have to make sure that your quality assurance, quality control infrastructure is in place to make sure you get the right components tested against the international standards.
All right, and finally, unfortunately, we're running short on time, but I'm just going to ask you this one last question about the different sectors. We are talking about sustainability in different brands, different products, etc. But do you think it's something, or circular economy aspect is achievable in all of the sectors, in all of these countries that you have a base on?
Yes, I think it is possible. But I also think it's a matter of time, right? Because it will need a lot of education, and I keep coming back to it again and again. What corporates like Unilever can do is only their bit in driving this agenda. Yeah, we are only a part of the solution. We are not the solution alone, right? The solution will lie in the hand of the government bodies, other corporates like us, and even consumers to keep reminding themselves that their choices and their consumption choices, more importantly, impact not only their own existence, but also the planet's existence.
Of course.
So I think, coming back to your question, I think it's possible. I think it'll be imminent very soon. And as per UAE government and Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, if the world were to consume like the UAE consumes, we will need about 4 to 5 planets, right, to have our population thrive. So I think it's imminent. But it's only a matter. It'll take some time.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? That's a big question. Do we have enough time, though? But anyway, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for those valuable insights from both these different sectors, which we needed right now. And thank you for watching AB Live. We will be back again next Tuesday.